Hello and welcome to the Kemetic How-To Guide for Egyptian Pagan and Kemetic practitioners. I'm your host, Sharon. I suppose today I should say for Egyptian Pagan, Kemetic, and other ancient Near Eastern practitioners, because I do get a lot of questions about other forms of ancient Near Eastern paganism. And that's something I'm interested in learning about myself. So today we are going to be talking about Canaanite paganism, being modern pagan revivals of the religions of ancient Canaan, aka the Levant, aka the territory now covered by the modern nations of Israel, Palestine, Syria, and Lebanon. So, it's kind of an obscure topic. There's not a lot out there about Canaanite paganism, but there is a primary source that we can go to, and that is Whisper of Stone by Tess Dawson, Modern Canaanite Religion. And I have to say, this book is very well researched. I recognized a couple of her sources, specifically the book Did God Have a Wife? And I can tell that the author has spent a lot of time researching her subject. And generally I give this book high marks. So if you're interested in learning about Canaanite paganism and you want to try this book, do so with confidence. Now, I want to explore a little bit more about it. For example, she explains in her introduction, she comes from a Wiccan background, and her rituals do kind of echo that format, but she uses Canaanite concepts and incorporates those into it. For example, instead of using quarter calls to cast a circle, she uses the 7 elements of Baal's celestial palace to create a sacred space. And she takes you through a Canaanite liturgical year, and you can tell that this is, something unique. It's not a rehash of the Wheel of the Year. As a matter of fact, if you're familiar with the Jewish liturgical calendar, there are a few echoes of that, which makes sense because the Jewish religion evolved out of the Canaanite religion. My only complaint, I guess, about the Canaanite calendar, but then again, that might be something that the sources that she's using, which I believe is a calendar from Ras Shamra in Syria, it may not have had this in there, but there is a weeping for Tammuz, which was observed. It's referred to in a couple of passages in the Old Testament. That's better documented, and if you talk to folks that are interested in Mesopotamian paganism, there's information on that, and there isn't any in here, but otherwise great coverage of that. And so if you want to get started, this really will get you on your way. I have only 2 quibbles with it, and you know me, if I only have 2 things to say about it, then you're doing pretty good. First of all, for the direction of east in her rituals, the text says, and she's using different elements to build Baal's celestial palace, and for east and gold, she says, I place gold in the east, just as the sunrise over the vast yellow Sahara lies east of Canaan. No. If you look at a map, Canaan is here, and Africa and the Sahara is over here, not to the east, but to the west of Canaan. Even if you were to count, which, do people still do this? If you counted the Arabian Desert as like an extension of the Sahara, still it would be a little more to the south. So, what I propose instead is, just as the sun rises to the east of Canaan, I place gold, so on, and if you pencil it in like that. The rest of it works beautifully. So just a bit of a geography quibble here. Just pencil that in, and otherwise the rituals work fine. Lastly, chapter 24, which deals with animal correspondences. She does try to provide Egyptian equivalent information, but whatever her source is for that must be really weird. Because according to this book, antelope, scarab beetles, cats, dogs, frogs, geese, ostrich eggs, and ravens were all used in healing. Again, not quite. Yes, all of those things had associations with particular deities, but not necessarily with healing. So, when it comes to Egyptian references, I wouldn't use this book to find Egyptian equivalents, but for the Canaanite stuff, she knows what she's talking about. So, if you're like me, and you try to sound out names as you're reading them, you might be a little confused at first. I would recommend skipping to the glossary of Ugaritic to English that's on page 344, because that's where she gives a little bit of hints on how to say some of the names. Otherwise, you might have a little trouble unless you're familiar with certain signs, like the ch, the sh, the s, hard s, and so on, and like all the different h's. If there's a dot under there, it's a hard H. And if it has a parenthetical kind of mark under it, it's a H. So that's something you might want to skip ahead to real quick, because it'll help you as you're reading the names when you go along. But now that we've covered really the only quibbles that I have about this book, let me offer some supplements to go with Whisperer's Stone. So if you're really interested in starting in Canaanite paganism and you want to get this one, she does have another book that's an anthology of devotional literature. But there's some other things that might help you a little bit on your way. First is actually an ancient Egyptian Herbal by Lisa Manish. Now, yes, it's ancient Egyptian, but the information that she gives in here refers to Babylonian and Aramaic sources. So it gives you a fair idea of what herbal medicine and materials, were being used especially in the relatively late antique period, in the Mediterranean world. So it's very helpful if you want to learn a little bit more about, herbal correspondences, and the herbal magic, things like that. There's great references here that would be relevant to you, even if you're not Egyptian pagan. If you are ancient Near Eastern pagan, you should check it out. Secondly, Did God Have a Wife? Archaeology and Folk Religion in Ancient Israel by William G. Dever. And he is a biblical archaeologist, but he spends a lot of time kind of slamming some of the older trains of thought in biblical archaeology. So, there's some interesting things with that, but this particular book deals very much with folk religion, which you come to find out was mostly polytheistic. The narrative about there being, patriarchs that worshipped only one god since the beginning, no. And he talks about some of the things that archaeology has shown about the reality of everyday practices in ancient Israel. He does tend to lump all pagan goddesses kind of under that mother goddess banner, because he's looking for references to Asherah or Athtirat in the Canaanite sources and Whisperer's Stone. But he tends to kind of conflate other deities with her, and that doesn't necessarily reflect what was going on at the time. But other than that, if you kind of keep that in the back of your mind, you'll find a lot of interesting things in this book. And don't forget National Geographic. Whisperer's Stone references a particular National Geographic article. This is a different one that you might want to check out if you can go to a local library, that has this. It is the December 1982 edition. This actually came from my grandfather's collection originally. I inherited it, but there is an article about the lost outpost of ancient Egypt. And that lost outpost of ancient Egypt is in Gaza. And this, obviously they were excavating this in the 70s, when the political situation was a little bit different. There's, really, really interesting illustrations in here. There's photos of jewelry and things that they found. That's one of the wonderful things about National Geographic is that there's, so much. It's a feast for the eyes as well as the brain. Another thing you can look up, and I believe this was, goodness, it was sometime a little later in the 80s. Look for a National Geographic article about the Bronze Age shipwreck of Uluburun off the coast of Turkey. There's a lot of great pictures in there and artifacts from all over the Mediterranean. Now, my last book suggestion is a great thing to get from your local library. There's a good chance you might find it there. And if you are a pagan undercover, this would be a great book to have on hand because great people of the Bible and how they lived. Oh, nothing wrong with that, right? Well, it is very much told with the eye for, Jewish and Christian tradition and explaining that and kind of retelling, in simplified form some of the stories from the Bible. But you have some really great illustrations, not only photographs, but also reconstructions and artist conceptions and things for daily life, including worship of other deities that was going on at that time in Canaan, and other areas, of the Holy Land. A question that has come up a lot, like in, Facebook groups and stuff like that, is what's the deal with the horned altars? Well, you've got some pictures of some right here, because horned altars were a big thing in ancient Canaan and other areas. It did spread to Egypt later on, but the horns were symbolizing the power of the god in question, bull's horns. It was evoking that. Now, this book was put out in the 1970s by Reader's Digest, and somehow what I love about it is you have recreations of ancient Canaanites, and the illustrations somehow managed to look 70s, even though they're not picturing people from the 70s. I mean, look at the lady over there who's supposed to be in Canaanite garb. Something about her, and yes, that's how their hairstyles were, but somehow it just still looks 70s. But it's great. And again, there's so many interesting things that you can learn in here. Things to kind of get your mind, envisioning things. They have a section on the Phoenicians and some of their deities, and what did a Phoenician temple look like? They kind of give a recreation of that. So if you want to imagine what a pagan temple might look like, hey, and it's all in a book about people of the Bible. As you're reading that book, obviously, all Christians seem to think that all pagan religions are about fertility, sex, and child sacrifice. So keep that in mind as you read their descriptions of what the cults of, ancient deities were probably like, because they probably didn't involve those things. Actually, the idea about was there sacred prostitution in the temples of, pagan goddesses like Ishtar, that's a debate that's been going on for just 100 years in modern times. The Greeks, wrote, lurid tales about this, but we don't have any conclusive evidence to say, oh yeah, there was, sacred tricks being turned in, the Temple of Ishtar. Probably not. Now, here's a fun thing about those horned altars and about other things that you can find in modern times that can be of help to you in, an ancient Near Eastern revivalist practice. This is a little incense burner that I got online on eBay for about $10. And check out the corners on it. It's like a horned altar for incense. Its ancestors go all the way back to biblical times and before. And now it's used to burn something called Buckhorn, which is kind of like incense, but, it can come either in little cake forms or like this stuff, which, it's floral scented. I can't convey that, obviously, but you would need a charcoal disc to burn this. But if you go to look for a Buckhorn burner, or they'll spell it Buckhorn, Bakhor, in variations. If you look for it online, watch out that you don't get one that's electric, because a lot of them now are plug-ins, and I've even seen ones you can plug into the cigarette lighter in your car, when you really gotta have, that fragrance, and an air freshener just won't do. One thing to keep in mind with Canaanite deity art is that there's a very heavy Egyptian influence on it, especially some of our best examples, like, for one example, Baal, Reshep or Reshpu. Who's this guy sheltering Ramesses II as a prince? It's not Horus, it's Horon, the Canaanite deity. We don't have a whole lot of artwork for Horon, who was actually a war deity associated with plague, but he could also protect you from these things. And that's what he's doing for Prince Ramesses in this artwork. And I actually got to see this as part of the Ramesses the Great exhibit, 30 years ago. So if you're looking for artwork of Horon, there you go. And of course, Asherah, Astarte, Anat. Now, one last deity that is in the Canaanite pantheon, and gets mentioned quite a bit in Whisper of Stone, is Koterawakasis, which means wise and crafty. And he has a home in Egypt, and he's a craftsman, so say hi to Ptah, or Koterawakasis. So if you're looking for a way to honor that deity, get yourself a statue of Ptah. So there you have some reference points for Canaanite deities, if you're interested in exploring that. Last point, there are no images of Canaanite pagan altars on the internet. I get bored, stuck at home, and decide to Google image search things, and you can go down some really crazy rabbit holes when you do that. Just looking for Baal, I ended up finding all sorts of, things that the fundamentalist Christians put out and things like that. But we need some more things of Canaanite altars. If you happen to have something like that, then share it, post it, put it on your blog or on a web page, or on Facebook or Pinterest or whatever, and tag it as a Canaanite altar so that people can see this stuff. Let's try and work those algorithms and tag things so that people can find it, and so people know you're there. Because there might be other people looking to do what you're doing. And let's try and get some more information out there. Sumerian pagans, this goes for you too. I'm going to talk about Sumerian paganism and some of the resources that I'm finding for that in an upcoming video. In the meantime, check out the Ishtar Gate. They have a really great site, so if you're interested in that, good starting point. Otherwise, hopefully this will get you started if you're interested in branching out to Egypt's neighbors, such as Canaan and Sumer and other places. And we'll be back with book reviews and more things like that coming up. I'm planning to do a video closer to Halloween where we'll find out what happened to our real doll that we wrapped up, and we'll see her mummy mask. Hopefully it'll be done by then, and we'll get to see her decked out for Halloween, and more good things like that. So stay tuned, and in the meantime, this is Sharon wishing you Synapti. Enjoyed this video? Then be sure to hit like and subscribe to the Kemetic Independent channel.
You can also buy my books on lulu.com and shop for pagan supplies in my Etsy store. Check the description for links. And special thanks to all my Patreon supporters. Join us for updates, outtakes, and exclusive videos only on Patreon.